one of the ways in which the CBC became so effective in getting a buy-in was by talking about parental involvement. And in fact, to this day, it was the hardest point I found in trying to refute it, because of a narrative that started in the 1980s. I can even remember the time and how it started. There was a narrative that started in the 1980s that parents are responsible for everything. We forgot about the village, and that narrative was pushed by the church. And I will explain later, after you hear where it came from in the United States. I will tell you how it happened, how it became prominent in Kenya.
Something that I know because of where I came from. This pro-life movement has a very specific origin in this country, and it has everything to do with the backlash against the civil rights movement. When the organizers of what was called the New Right were trying to figure out how the power that white people had had before the civil rights movement could be maintained if all of these black people were voting. This was their problem politically. They struggled with this in the 1970s, and they were trying to figure out how in a post-civil rights era they could unite white people without being explicitly racist. And a guy named Paul Weyrich went to Jerry Falwell when the IRS under the Carter administration cracked down on the segregation academies that Falwell and many others had started in the South. They started religious schools, and they would have segregated schools as religious schools to comply, quote unquote, with Brown in the public schools, but still have space for their white kids. That was the settlement, that they were working out in the 1970s. Weyrich went to Falwell and told him, if you get on board with this pro-life, pro-family message, you can unite those people without using racial language. And if you do that, we can lock down this block for at least 50 years. That's what he told him. And that's why the moral majority started. So I think it's incredibly important to inform people who care about life. Of course we care about life. As you were saying, everything's about life. The environment, climate change is about life, healthcare is about life. And there, are obviously conversations to have about policy around reproductive justice and all of these things. Okay, those conversations can be had, but this is about power. And this conversation of the pro-life coalition has a very specific origin. And I think if we can help to educate white voters about how people who wanted to hold on to white power without using racist language promoted racist policies by calling them pro-life, pro-family, I think we can at least reckon with what we're actually dealing with. And some people are going to say that's still where I am, but let's at least compel people to choose which side they're on, because I think it's a religious veneer to hide behind.
No, thank you for that. Thank you for that. I think that's exactly right.
It seems very American, but actually it's Kenyan. Let me just show you. Let me show you one incident of where that narrative comes up. This was a tweet, when was it? Here, 2018. So it was at the time when the conversation was going on. This was a tweet that was put out. Fathers have little study time to guide their children with schoolwork. And then they said new curriculum puts emphasis on parental engagement. I'm so sorry I didn't get enough materials. I wanted to show you that the impact of that narrative about family life. Now, it happened in the early 1990s. That was when I went to university. what happened is that before the 1990s, education, most people went to, most university students who attended university locally were going to the public, what do you call it, universities. And it was actually quite a good deal. We used to get a boom. I don't know if you heard of this. It was a stipend that we would get from the government every semester, and that we called boom. And the name came from the coffee boom of the 1970s. So we would get a stipend of 5,000 shillings a semester, which was a lot those days. I opened my first bank account with my boom. And then, so we would get a stipend and our food was paid for. The stipend, the understanding of the stipend was that we would use it for books and other expenses. And then our food was paid for and accommodation. So all we did was to go to university, get our boom and go to class. And of course, the thinking was that we would pay the money after we finished. But in the 1980s, the World Bank had started saying that they didn't want to pay, because this was not money Kenya had. They were getting it from the World Bank. So in the late 1980s, the World Bank started saying they didn't want to pay for these expenses. And they said there's no use of investing money in university education. We should be investing in primary school education, because Africans don't need university education. We just need primary school education. So they started withdrawing funding for the education system, and they started withdrawing money for hospitals, garbage collection, public transport, all these things which Nairobians and middle class kids were used to. The government started withdrawing money, the funding for those services. So when we are leaving, my generation, when we are leaving the public universities and about to graduate, we are finding that the primary schools we went to that were funded by the public had now been run down. So that meant that if we were getting married and starting our families, our children could not afford, we did not expect our children to go to the rundown primary schools. So how was this going to be justified? Family values. So we started getting these churches. There was these very bourgeois Nairobi churches with many times with American pastors. They now started preaching the gospel of family values. You know, we started being told, oh yeah, the schools are bad anyway, so let's do homeschooling because God appointed the family as the primary caregiver. And that's the family values this guy is talking about. And we even had, I don't know whether I have that photo, this guy is called James Dobson, and he had a series that is called, as you can see there, Focus on the Family. Around in the 1990s, the TV stations started showing Focus on the Family on TV. And you see, if you can look for him on YouTube, although I really looked for some clips and I didn't find any. You will see that he doesn't mention the Bible when he's talking about the family. He just says, oh, kids do this, daddies do this, mommies do this, etc. And they used to bring this, I remember, on KBC just before the news. So you know that time between when the last program ends and the news starts, like that 5-minute segment, this was what they used to bring. So these were the people who were giving us advice about the family, about the parents being the whatever. And of course, implied in that narrative is that it's the women who are going to stay at home and take care of the kids and educate them, because now we are doing homeschooling, since the family is the most important element of the nation. And that is the best place where the child can get the education. So what happened now? By the time KICD comes in 2017, and says that the family is now, we are going to have parents involved in their child's education. This is what the Kenyans were hearing. They were hearing, oh, family is the primary unit. We are not being overtaken by the school. We now have a role in the life of the child. Oh, we like this curriculum because it's involving the parents.